吃到不急。
So the EU European Union has the most stringent carbon price in the world right now. It's about 90 euros, which is about 130 Canadian dollars, right?
Mm-hmm.
So our carbon price is $65 right now, Canadian. So the EU's carbon price is double ours. And
Mm-hmm.
there's kind of two data points there. One is our carbon price does include methane. Thank you very much. The EU's will in 2026,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they're including more gases and they're including more things in their carbon price, just as we are over time. Theirs is going up. Their projection is that by 2030, people should be budgeting for $203 US, about 275 Canadian dollars. So the EU is telling people when you do your budgetary projections, budget $275 Canadian per ton for any CO2 or methane equivalent that you emit in 2030. And that in Canada, we're supposed to be 130 Canadian, less than half of that, right? Our social cost of carbon is very much aligned with the EU's projections on this demand stuff. You know, the current government has already, increased the cap once. If it wins the next election, which hopefully it will, it'll probably do that again. Certainly the majority of Canadians are in favor of that, despite the attempts by people to say no. And so the reason this becomes important is the EU is also in 2026 pricing carbon that crosses its borders. Carbon border adjustment mechanism that comes into play fiscally in 2026 means if there's a ton of oil that's manufactured in Alberta that has, for example, 2 tons of CO2 attached to it, well, that ton of oil is going to be costed for the 2 tons of CO2 at $275 per ton. So $550, that carbon price starts to make a difference on anything that enters the EU. So LNG exports to Europe, the upstream methane emissions in Canada, if we start emitting, will be priced at those price points in the future. And that goes up from there. It goes up to, let me just do the math here, 300 euros to CAD is $430 Canadian per ton in 2050, right? So now the EU is the third largest economic bloc in the world. It's, it's like United States, China, EU. If you add the UK and Turkey to the EU, why not? It's actually bigger than China still, right? People keep talking about a country rating, but the EU operates as an economic unit, as a country. Yeah. We should be thinking of it that way as a regional entity, not thinking of Germany, France, and stuff. For these purposes, the carbon border adjustment mechanism applies to all the countries that are in the EU. And so the third biggest economy in the world is pricing carbon at those very high rates. That's what they're managing their emissions trading scheme to. And so that means anything that comes out of a high carbon economy, like Canada's, that goes into the EU as an export today is going to be economically disadvantaged. So countries that actually have a carbon emission scheme, like Canada, like California, like China, if they actually price carbon, they get to deduct the price of carbon from the amount they have to give the EU. The idea, this was going to drive up carbon prices in every major trading economy in the world. And it's being led by the EU. And it, by the way, means that anybody who expects to send high carbon stuff to the EU is out of luck.